Hello right bags, it's Jade Plays Games. Welcome to What's Happening. I take you through some interesting stories about gaming. Whether it's positive, whether it's negative, we take a look at a game and see how successful it's been, or where it maybe needs to improve, or if there's just something downright odd. Scum definitely fits in that category. Over 1 million people bought a copy of the game by the third week of sale when it launched in early access last August. Since then, numbers have dwindled. Despite lots of content updates and good communication from developers, the numbers have gone as low as 3,000 to 4,000 players a day. Compare that to some other really popular survival games and that's just not good enough. So what is happening with Scum? Is there anything wrong with it? Is it going to make a comeback, or is this the start of a dead game?
Scum, welcome to the next era in Supermax survival.
Now I say what went wrong with Scum very lightly. It's still of course played by a good amount of players, considering there are so many survival games out there, but it's nowhere near the level it should be at. If you've never heard of Scum, Scum is an open world survival game where you face off supposedly against 64 other players on a prison island. The goal is to get enough fame points that you can make your escape from the island, participating in events, getting renown, and basically allowing you to do things on the island by building up your reputation. These fame points can be awarded in different ways, just through surviving, completing objectives, and taking out other players. It's a very much hardcore survival game, taking a real in-depth look at vitamins, the type of foods you eat, how your activity affects your shape and how you look. Not to mention how your insides work. So maybe not a universally open game for everyone to just pick up and play. If you like survival games, you're going to have maybe more of a chance of enjoying Scum than others, but maybe that is one of the first barriers. Scum hit dizzying heights of 68,000 players on Monday, August the 27th. Now in this timeline it shows monthly what happens after that, and as you can see, Scum has really dipped. So how can a game that sold 700,000 copies in the first week alone, well over 1 million by the time October started, only actually have 2,700 players as of January 2019? Well, let's go back to that little point I made just before showing you. Scum is a very hardcore game. Eating in Scum is pretty much more important than fighting off hordes of puppets. These are the zombie-like creatures that run around basically plaguing you and stopping you from having full free reign of the island. You need a good intake of vitamins to keep tip top. You also need protein and you need carbohydrates. As some of these preview videos show, the impact of exercise and the way that you perform certain actions in the game will result in your body having mass changes. Very much a bit like old school GTA, where when you were CJ you were able to pump up your body and become a bit of a meathead if you wanted, or if you wanted to eat all the burgers you could happily do that. Now, this is actual footage of me in the gym, so we'll try and find some real footage of the game. But as you can see, it really maybe isn't for everyone having so much focus on your body. It's pretty much in the realms of RPG, and that just isn't for everyone. Some people really do like old school systems of just putting points in whatever skill you like. Now, does this really impact the actual gameplay as you're playing it? As you can see, I've fast forwarded a little bit. He's gained a little bit of muscle tone now, and he seems to be getting a little bit more hench. When I first heard about this, I thought this would be a pretty decent plus. I thought it would differentiate it from being any other generic survival game, focusing really on your intake and how you can make your character look and perform better. That was much better than having some sort of skill system where you just arbitrarily pop a point into lockpicking or put a point into stamina. You would actually increase your skills by completing them actions. But maybe it's just a little bit obtuse, and maybe it just takes far too long to get to the stage where you see improvements in your character. I've got plenty of other ideas and suggestions, so we're going to start rattling them off why I think Scum isn't doing as well as it could be doing. So what about crafting? Perhaps that's the reason people just haven't taken to the game. They don't necessarily want to be fiddling around with stuff, and rather maybe a pick up and play option. However, most survival games rely on this. People that bought this game kind of knew it was going to be a crafting and survival game, and that's generally the kind of game they want to play. The open world setting of Scum seems pretty cool. You're on a mysterious island set in Croatia where sometimes it's sunny, there's weather effects that can create rain, and they've just recently had a winter themed event over Christmas. There's various different resources that you can craft and gather, as well as coming across towns and small cities where you can also loot goods. But the distances between these towns and these places where you can loot is often quite large, and in between you're going to need to keep up your food, your water intake, as well as make sure you're prepared for the environment. Vehicles added recently help with that situation, but maybe for a lot of people it's just too much getting to that stage of being able to get a vehicle, and so you don't really want to have to be traipsing across a map all the time just to play it. So what about combat? Well, as you come across these puppets, they will get wind of you and they will attack you on sight. So you've got to defend yourself with whatever weapons you have to hand, or a good fashioned fist up. You can punch and box in this game. The unarmed combat is meant to be a pretty good focus. You can improve how your boxing skills are, as well as your upper core strength. It all falls part of that improving your character rather than just putting points into a skill tree. And that's taking on enemies that are there provided by the game. Of course, you've got other players, which makes up most of the fun and the gaming aspects for this game. But of course, when the game isn't being played by lots of people, it means the servers are pretty dead. So the chances of coming across another player become even more slim on a giant, massive, huge map. Take into account you can still offline raid, and even though they've just implemented a fortification system, it means that you can quickly and easily be wiped while you're offline. At its heart, Scum is a upgraded version of DayZ. That is my opinion. You're very much doing exactly the same gameplay loops as you would in that game. They're both very much hardcore games, survival with its main core aspect. Scum definitely does a hell of a lot of things better than DayZ, but maybe it doesn't just do enough to differentiate it from all the other generic survival games out there. For me, survival games are classed into 2 or 3 categories. You've got survival games that pit you against the environment. Think of games like Green Hell, maybe The Raft, Stranded Deep, or even The Forest. Then you've got games that are big open survival games like Conan Exiles and Ark that rely on you taking on lots of enemies and exploration. And then you've got the survival games that rely a lot on crafting and building and being able to build up your bases and your forts, very much like 7 Days to Die, DayZ and Scum. A lot of these games are generally PvP focused, take away 7 Days to Die, and generally that's what you expect. Lots of players versus players, killing each other and stealing loot. And at first, Scum was doing that pretty well. Lots of big streamers got behind the game and they were playing it, and obviously that must have led to a hell of a lot of people buying it. Scum really liked their inertia system, trying to differentiate itself from the lumbering of DayZ or slower paced survival games where you can run, you can move, depending on your body size, quickly and fluidly. This is just one of the great aspects that I think Scum has got going for it. It isn't just a very slow, basic, methodical survival game. There are different ways to play, and once you get to the level where you're actually able to get lots of high-end gear, I'm sure the game becomes much more enjoyable. But it's getting to that stage. As it is a hardcore game, you're going to spend a massive amount of time running around just looting empty buildings for a packet of crisps or a can of cola. And I think this is where Scum starts to fall apart a little bit. Gaming has changed. We've had a lot of survival games. We've had a lot of looting games. You think about DayZ, you think about other games that have been around just as long, like Miscreated, even games like Rust or Hurt World. Particularly on PC, where there's loads of these games giving you lots of choice. Another game that at its core has the very similar mechanics maybe isn't going to carry on doing as well as it should. Even if that game has better graphics and it seems to run better or implements the gameplay that took years for some of them games, it's not going to matter to the player that has played a lot of the similar titles. I think gamers are looking for more innovative ways to play a survival game nowadays, and Scum seem to have that in mind. They've been constantly adding updates, they've not abandoned the game at all. And although updates are slow to around once a month now, they're still significant in terms of the content they're delivering. This isn't a video to slate Scum or its development. I think they're pretty much doing the stand-up job of adding content to the game. But is the content they're adding enticing players back to try it? Part of the whole early access vibe is releasing content enough that you're going to keep people playing it so it stays in people's minds and their eyes when it hits full release. If people aren't turning up for major updates to play the game, you know you've got a bit of a problem. I played Scum when it first came out, I sunk a good few hours into it and I've been playing it recently. What I've basically discovered is it takes way too long, and it's got very much the traditional boring grindy aspects of some of them more hardcore games like DayZ. And that may be okay, and that may be exactly what the developers want, but it's clearly not what the fan base want. Otherwise, their million people would still all be playing it, or at least a good 50,000 of them. I think lots of developers now overestimate how much we want some of these survival games to be hardcore or be realistic. Game developers have seen the success of other games like DayZ, and even though that had troubled development, it's still one of the most popular survival games ever, and they thought maybe we can get a slice of that pie. Maybe that's what they see in the forums time and time again, people asking for more realistic gameplay, more realistic survival combat. But when you boil it down, people have short attention spans nowadays. People are really starting to have much more choice in what they play, even on console. So the idea that you stick with just one game and you play that one game constantly, unless you're some Fortnite dweeb, is a little bit old school. And so when players do come back to your game, or you want them to carry on playing it, they need a bit of an easy start. Now, I'm not just some PvE pussy proclaiming the game's too hard. You don't have to water down the experience completely, but I do think you need to find ways that will get people more in the end game loop quicker, and that entices them to carry on playing the game a little bit more. Maybe with experience you get to know exactly where to find the best loot, what towns are going to offer you the best upgrades and weapons, and so you can get kitted out really quickly. But even getting to that stage where you're able to go and invade one of these places and actually steal some decent loot is a real grind. Now that's only from my experience. If you've played the game more and you know a lot more different, or you can get access to some of the stuff earlier, then let me know why it is you just don't play the game as much. But I see that as maybe an issue. It's the starting point. I think they've maybe misjudged their audience for it, or certainly they're happy with their audience size, and maybe the game was just overblown out of proportion. It's one of the aspects that sometimes make these games great, finding that sweet rifle that's going to finally allow you to shoot something with all the bullets you've been collecting for days. But when you haven't got loot spawning that much, or you've got to travel vast areas of the map just to get some decent gear, it becomes monotonous. Add to that the crafting system is a little bit obtuse as well, and it maybe just doesn't necessarily gel quickly enough. There seems to be a fascination started by DayZ in always having your craftable items realistic, so that they're in your hands when you're crafting something, or you can only have certain items in certain grids because of the size of that item. And I think a lot of games misunderstand that. We maybe want a hardcore survival experience where we have to rely on food and water, take care of our body temperature and make sure we're not in rain or bad weather. But I don't think that needs to extend to the menu systems. I think that should be the easy part of the game, and the actual gameplay should be the hard part. So maybe that's just a couple reasons why people aren't playing the game as much. They don't necessarily want to get too involved with the body stats and the systems and the way that you have to upgrade your character gradually over time. The looting aspect is maybe just a bit too long, or maybe the crafting UIs and stuff like that puts people off. Maybe it's not something Scum are actually doing wrong. Maybe it is just down to too many games like that out at the moment. 5 years ago, survival gaming was a very different place. As you can see, DayZ was king. There really wasn't that many other games like it beforehand. Then Rust come out, and Rust really took that next level of PvP. It didn't necessarily need lots of high-end guns to have a good time in that game. You could immediately get going, and you'd always counter other players quickly. As both of these games gained popularity and lost popularity over the next year and a half, 2 years, we did start to see other games creep up. Although it's not really played that much, Miscreated fits in well with Scum, DayZ and the Rust comparisons. Interestingly enough, all three of these games actually released in full release last year. And Rust has managed to maintain its player base for all of that time. In fact, it's just had its best month ever. What these charts show is that even though a game can be massively popular, you will always encounter a drop off, but then the game normally starts rising again. But Scum hasn't had that yet. And maybe it will. Maybe it will kick in and it will go strength to strength just like Rust did. But what I'm seeing right now is way too much of a lower number considering just how popular it was when it launched. What you'll notice as well is there are lots of peaks, there are lots of up and downs, and these are usually tiered around updates. When one of these games gets a big update, it means more players flock to the game. But Scum really hasn't had that uptake. It really hasn't had that interest put into it where players will come running back for an update. One of the biggest updates in Scum was around December the 20th, adding a bunch of features like fortifications for the first time to the game. And it did increase the player count momentarily. It almost went double from what it had been at 2,500 up to over 5,000 players. And in less than a month, it's already gone back to its 2,000, 3,000 threshold that it had previously been for months. So is Scum just a little bit too much of a clone of the games that have gone before it? Has it just not had enough interesting updates to keep people playing? Looking at the forums, there are a lot of complaints about bugs and issues affecting the gameplay, and this really does seem to have been an issue that has put off a lot of people from returning. They want to see it when it returns more stable and it doesn't have as many game-breaking bugs and glitches. That's why I said that gaming nowadays, particularly early access, is very different from 5 years ago, where players would put up with a lot more bugs and issues. Nowadays, if there's a bug or an issue with a game, you can just pick up a different game. There is so much choice, you don't have to bear through something that keeps breaking or something that keeps disappointing you. Or is it down to general gaming habits and it's nothing to do with just survival? The last 6 months for gaming has been incredibly tough for anyone launching their game. Red Dead, Call of Duty, Battlefield. While some of these games you would think don't fit into this sort of genre, they still take players away from it because a lot of people that like survival games also generally like shooters. And there has been a whole bunch of other competition coming in the last few months as well. Lots of brand new startup games, lots and lots of early access titles, and PC crowds particularly are keen to try new stuff out. Launching in a year when the 3 biggest survival games out there in its genre have also gone 1.0 probably wasn't the best idea too. With DayZ promising fixes, optimizations and really concentrated content, people did get behind it and they were excited about playing it, and it's meant that even before the game came out it started rising in its numbers. Rust, after its 1.0 release last April, has gone from strength to strength, releasing different content updates that meant that players would have more interesting things to do even though it had released. And while Miscreated is the little black sheep of the family, that game did add a bunch of new improvements as well over the Christmas period when it came out into 1.0 release. So I'll go out on a limb and say I don't think Scum developers are doing anything too wrong. They're putting out regular content, they're keeping their players engaged, they're talking to them on social media and the forums. But it's just bad timing they decided to release their game in a year where there was so much competition from AAA games as well as some of these big huge games coming out with early access. The other aspect we should note as well, of course, though, is that maybe they don't really mind. They've got their money, let's give them the chance to develop and get further content into the game. So even if players aren't playing it, it can make a resurgence just like DayZ did. With the amount of copies they sold, they have pretty much set their company up for the next 2 years of being able to develop this game without any further funding. They do have tentative plans to release it on different platforms. And initially they have said they want to come out of early access in 2019. That would be a huge achievement compared to other games like Rust and DayZ that spent years in early access. There have been some calls on the forums about cheating and hackers ruining the game, but that's pretty much the same that gets labelled at any online game. You're always going to have them issues and problems, and I don't think they've made the game that bad. There certainly are some issues that I've seen on the forums, but nothing that no other game has not had to deal with. Right now it's sitting at a 54% mixed review score. Its all-time review score is 65%. What I can agree with many of the positive reviews is that Scum is very much a polished game compared to some of the others. They haven't taken years to get to the standard that some of the others have taken, and they've kept relevant and are implementing features that a lot of the older games just haven't kept up with. A lot of the negative reviews back up what I said about the loot tables maybe not being correct. And a lot of the positive reviews outline the fact that it is a very much better DayZ version. So no doubt about it, Scum is going to continue to develop and it will continue to be a good game for people that put the time into it. But what can Scum do to elevate it above just being a good game and being a fantastic game that's well received like Rust? What can it do to make sure it doesn't fall into the same problems and issues that DayZ ended up having? Scum isn't a terrible game. It isn't necessarily most original either. And I think that lies the problem. It just doesn't have enough fresh ideas that are making it different implemented just yet. Of course, it is very early and they will implement these other features and will give a little bit new variety to the game. But right now the genre has been oversaturated for years and I just think Scum didn't have enough to keep it different. I am going to enjoy taking a look at this game in the next few months, seeing how it develops and seeing what kind of content they add to it in the future. By no means is this a critical or really hyper analytical look at Scum. I have not put that many hours into the game, but I can only go and I'm only giving my opinion, and this is pretty much what a lot of people who haven't picked up the game probably have of the game, or people that did play the game in the first few weeks of early access and haven't touched it since. Scum needs to do something. They need to ramp up its content plans, or they need to be able to convince its community they're adding content that makes it worth sticking around. But the game is just a little bit empty. There's meant to be lots more creatures and animals in there, which I've rarely found in my 3 or 4 hours playing it. And coming across another player when the servers are so low populated is a real issue too. Maybe they need to cut down on the servers and make sure that they're more condensed and more people are playing at the same time. These are just a couple suggestions. You guys let me know how you're getting on with Scum. What do you see as the biggest problem hindering it from having more players? And what would you like to see added so that other players will come back to the game? Do you think there's a problem at all? Agree, disagree, pop it in the comments section down below. Let me know what you're thinking about Scum. I am Jade Plays Games, this has been What's Happening. I'm looking forward to covering this again in a few months and see where Scum is at. Until then, I will see you ratbags later.